I subscribe to a weekly current affairs magazine, which includes, among other things, a chess column. The column typically includes a summary of an interesting professional chess match and also some kind of chess problem. How can black force checkmate in 5 moves, something like that. Now, even though I'm not a chess player, I know enough about the basics of the game to understand what the columnist is saying, even if I can't appreciate all the nuances and details. But someone who didn't know even the basics about chess, the rules and aims of the game, the names of the pieces, the moves that the pieces can make, and so forth, someone who didn't even know the basics wouldn't be able to understand those chess columns at all. Playing chess well takes a lot of knowledge and practice, but you have to start with the basics. You have to get the basics nailed down before you can move on to more advanced topics. It's rather like that when studying religions. You need to understand the foundational beliefs and practices of a religion in order to make headway in understanding it and discussing it. That is certainly true of Christianity, isn't it? For example, you couldn't enter into a discussion of different eschatological positions, premillennialism, postmillennialism, amillennialism. You couldn't enter into that kind of discussion without knowing the basic tenets of Christianity, what it says about God, about Jesus Christ, about Christ's first coming, about the nature of the church, and so on. And the same is true of Islam. In order to speak meaningfully about Islam and to engage intelligently with Muslims, we need to get the basics down. So that's my task in this second lecture, to answer the question, what are the basic facts about Islam, about its origins, and about its defining beliefs and practices? Well, let's begin with some definitions, starting with the word Islam itself. Islam is an Arabic word that literally translates as submission or surrender. Islam, then, is a religion that centers on the idea of submission to God, submission to the will of God as it has been revealed to mankind. The first chapter of the Quran speaks of the straight path. The straight path, that is the path of absolute submission to Allah. Now, the word Muslim, of course, is closely related to the word Islam in Arabic. Muslim literally means someone or something in the state of Islam, that is, in submission to Allah. Strictly speaking, Muslim doesn't refer exclusively to a religious believer or to an adherent of Islam. According to Islamic teachings, God created everything Muslim, that is, in a state of Islam, in a natural state of submission. Indeed, we're told that every human is born Muslim, but not every human being remains in that state of Islam. Some are led astray. They become Christians, they become Jews, they become atheists. You've probably heard it said that Islam means peace. That's not correct. Although there is a grain of truth in it, in that the Arabic word for peace, salam, comes from the same root word as Islam. They have the same consonant, so they are related. However, what a Muslim means by peace won't necessarily align with what a Christian or other non-Muslim means by peace. Strictly speaking, in Islamic understanding, peace, salam, is the state of perfect harmony experienced by a person who is Muslim, that is, in a state of submission. So those are the Arab meanings, or the Arabic meanings, but for the purposes of these lectures, I'm going to adopt the more conventional definitions of those terms. So Islam will refer to the religious faith and traditions that are centered on Muhammad and the Quran, and Muslim will refer to an adherent of the Islamic faith. Well, so much for definitions. Let's now turn to consider the historical origins of Islam. Where did it come from? There's quite a lot of scholarly debate today over the exact origins of Islam, but the basic facts are fairly well established and widely agreed. The religion dates to the early 7th century, so that's some 600 years after the birth of Christ. The location of its origins is Arabia, as you know, but specifically two cities, the cities of Mecca and Medina. The founder of Islam is, of course, Muhammad. Full name, Muhammad ibn Abdallah, which means the son of Abdallah. And Abdallah means a servant of Allah, a servant of God. And Muhammad, we think, lived from 570 to 632. Note, however, that Muslims do not consider Muhammad to be the founder of Islam. They would say that Islam is in fact the one true religion that dates all the way back to the creation. And Muhammad is merely the last of the prophets of Islam. Islam, of course, has a scripture, a holy book, the Quran. But actually, as we'll discover later on, it acknowledges other scriptures as well. But certainly it's focused on this book, the Quran. As far as historical influences on Islam go, there are two main historical influences. One would be what we call Abrahamic monotheism. That is the religious tradition of Christianity and Judaism, both which have influenced Islam. But the second major influence would be Arabian pagan polytheism. And that would be more of a negative influence insofar as Islam was founded in reaction to this pagan polytheism, but some remnants of Arabian paganism can still be seen in the Quran and in the Islamic traditions. We can also ask the question of character. What kind of a religion was it originally? What was its character? Initially, it was a monotheistic reform movement. That's basically what it is, what it was, a monotheistic reform movement. But later on, it evolved into a complex religious legal system. Well, let's turn now to the foundational beliefs and practices that define Islam. Every religion has its own distinctive teachings and practices that distinguish it from other religions, and Islam is no exception. In the case of Islam, we have 5 and 5. 5 beliefs or core tenets and 5 practices known as the 5 pillars of Islam. Let's begin with the beliefs. The first belief is belief in God, belief in Allah. Scholars still debate the origins and original meaning of the word Allah, but whatever the case, Allah is basically the Arabic equivalent of our word God. In fact, Arabic-speaking Christians will use Allah when referring to God. Strictly speaking, it isn't a proper name like Zeus or Thor or even Yahweh. Although it's often treated like a proper name, it's really a title. It just means God. So Muslims must, of course, believe in God, but it's much more specific than that. Islam teaches a very strict and uncompromising monotheism. Islam has a central and defining doctrine known as Tawheed. Tawheed. The word means oneness, and Tawheed refers to the absolute unity and singularity of God. In general, Islam doesn't place great emphasis on doctrine, but this is one point at which doctrine is all important. The oneness of God in Islam is often set in opposition to the Christian doctrine of the Trinity, or rather, as we will see later, a distortion of that doctrine. But there is a flip side to this idea of Tawheed, and that is the sin of denying or compromising the oneness of Allah. This is known as the sin of shirk. Shirk means association. It's the idea of associating partners with Allah. This is the greatest sin in Islam. Indeed, it is the unforgivable sin. Both idolaters and polytheists are guilty of shirk. Here's one verse from the Quran that makes this point. God does not forgive the joining of partners with him. Anything less than that he forgives to whoever he will. but anyone who joins partners with God has concocted a tremendous sin. There is ongoing debate among Muslim scholars as to whether Christians are guilty of shirk. So the first belief is belief in God. The second belief is belief in the angels. Belief in the angels. Angels are understood in much the same way in Islam as they are in the Jewish and Christian traditions. In Islam, angels serve primarily as messengers. For example, the angel Gabriel brings a message to Muhammad, we're told. Muslims also distinguish between angels and another kind of supernatural being known as jinn. Jinn is actually where we get our English word genie. The exact relationship between angels and jinn isn't clear in the Quran, but one difference appears to be that angels are always good, they're always faithful servants of Allah, and perhaps can't even do evil. They don't have the freedom to do evil, whereas jinn can be good or evil. They could be good spirits or evil spirits. The second belief, then, is belief in the angels. The third belief is belief in the books or belief in the scriptures. Islam claims to be a revealed religion, and it holds to divinely inspired scriptures. Many Christians are surprised to discover that the Quran isn't the only divinely inspired book that Islam recognizes, at least in principle. Islam teaches that there were a series of inspired books prior to the Quran. And in fact, the Quran mentions some of them by name. The Torah, given through Moses, the Psalms, the Book of David, and the Gospel, or as the Quran calls it, the Injil, which came through Jesus. Each of these divinely given books came through one of Allah's messengers, so Islam teaches. Nevertheless, the Quran enjoys a unique status in Islam as the final and definitive revelation to mankind. Belief 3, then, is belief in the books. The fourth belief is belief in the prophets and messengers. Belief in the prophets and messengers. Islam makes a distinction between prophets and messengers, but exactly what that distinction isn't entirely clear. Generally speaking, in Islam, a prophet is anyone who delivers a revelation from Allah, so much like the Christian view. However, a messenger is a special kind of prophet. All messengers are prophets, but not all prophets are messengers. The Arabic word that's used for messenger is rasul, and it's sometimes translated in English apostle. So there's a special category of messengers or apostles. And the basic idea appears to be that a messenger is given a book and is sent to a particular people group. So, for example, Moses is a messenger sent to the Israelites, whereas Muhammad is a messenger sent to the Arabs. The Quran appears to name 25 prophets, 21 of which are also found in the Bible. But only 9 of these prophets in the Quran are described as messengers. And these 9 include Noah, Ishmael, Moses, Jesus, and Muhammad, of course. So the fourth belief is belief in the prophets and messengers. And then the fifth belief is belief in the resurrection and judgment. Belief in the resurrection and judgment. Along with Judaism and Christianity, Islam teaches that there will be a final day of judgment when the dead will be raised and everyone will receive reward or punishment according to their deeds. Judgment in Islam is clearly on the basis of both faith and works. And this idea of a final judgment was a central part of Muhammad's message. Included in this belief in the final judgment is a distinction, of course, between heaven or paradise and hell. The Quran has a great deal to say about paradise and even more to say about hell. It isn't wholly clear exactly what determines where a person ends up, except that it depends in part on deeds, on whether you've lived a righteous life Now, I've listed 5 beliefs here, but based on a well-established tradition, many Muslims would in fact add a 6th tenet to the previous 5, namely belief in the decree of Allah. Islam, at least in its mainstream traditional form, has a very strong doctrine of divine foreordination and predestination. Some go so far as to say that it's fatalistic. That may not be entirely fair. There are actually different interpretations within Islamic scholarship. But at any rate, Islam is quite emphatic that everything that takes place in the world does so according to the will of Allah. And so, for this reason, Muslims will often add the qualification, inshallah, to statements about future events, if Allah wills, or as we might say, God willing. Islam then has 5 or possibly 6 defining beliefs or doctrines. Equally important, however, if not more important, are its practices. It has been said that Islam is primarily a religion of orthopraxy, that is, right practice, as opposed to orthodoxy, right doctrine. There are a number of central defining practices, and these are referred to as the 5 pillars of Islam. 5 pillars of Islam. The first is known as the Shahada, the profession or the confession of faith. And it's this simple statement: there is no God but Allah, and Muhammad is the messenger of Allah. There's no God but Allah, and Muhammad is the messenger of Allah. Note the 2 essential parts to this. One part about God, acknowledging God, and the second part, acknowledging Muhammad. The Shahada is part of the Muslim call to prayer, and so it is repeated multiple times daily by faithful Muslims. And in fact, a person becomes a Muslim, converts to Islam, by reciting the Shahada in Arabic in the presence of 2 witnesses. So the first practice is the profession, Shahada. The second practice is prayer or salat. Muslims, as you probably know, are required to pray 5 times daily, and according to very precise prescriptions, both the words that are to be used and the gestures or actions that follow. The prayer times are basically determined by the position of the sun. There's one prayer at sunrise, another at noon, one at mid-afternoon, one at sunset, and then one in the evening prayer. Now, these prayers can be conducted anywhere, with one exception. Muslim men are required to attend congregational prayers at the mosque on Fridays at noon. And this weekly congregational prayer, known as the Jummah, is normally accompanied by a sermon by the Imam. Imam just refers to the mosque leader. Muslims are required to go through a rigorous purification process before prayers. And this involves the very careful washing of the feet, hands, face, and mouth, inside the mouth. And they must also, of course, face Mecca while they are praying. And in fact, mosques are oriented in such a way as to facilitate this, including a niche in the wall known as the mihrab, which indicates the direction of Mecca. So if you go to a mosque, you'll see this niche in the wall that is indicating the direction of Mecca, the direction of prayer. Now, these salat prayers, these ritual prayers, are not petitionary prayers, as we might understand as Christians. We say our daily prayers, we ask God for various things. Now, Muslims may make those kind of prayers, they usually do. But these salat prayers are prescribed prayers and prostrations, the purpose of which is to express submission to Allah. And these prayers often involve recitations of verses from the Quran. The third pillar of Islam is almsgiving. In Islam, there's a very strong sense of community and mutual obligation among believers, and the regular giving of alms represents part of that obligation. Strictly speaking, this isn't charitable giving because it isn't voluntary. You have to give this. It's more like a kind of a religious tax or levy based on your membership of the Muslim community. The Quran doesn't specify an amount, but according to an established tradition, Muslims should give annually 2.5% of their wealth, not just their income, but their wealth. And this is to support the poor and the needy within the Muslim community. There is a verse in the Quran which says that alms are for the cause of Allah, for the cause of Allah. And some Muslims will interpret that as any support for the promulgation of Islam. So that could include, for example, building and maintaining mosques. The fourth pillar is fasting. Fasting, the annual fast. During the month of Ramadan, the 9th month in the Islamic calendar, Muslims are required to practice a total fast from sunrise to sunset. No drink, not even water, no food, no smoking, no sexual activity. Some exceptions to the fast are allowed for reasons of health, pregnant or nursing women, those who are sick, those who are elderly, but otherwise it is absolutely required. According to Islamic tradition, this month of Ramadan was the month in which the Quran was first revealed to Muhammad. That's the significance of the month. And since Muslims follow a lunar calendar that follows the movement of the moon rather than the sun, Ramadan actually falls at a different time in each solar year, our calendar year. And it can be particularly challenging for Muslims when Ramadan falls during the summer, both because of the heat, it's warmer, hotter, so you get more thirsty, you want to drink, but also because, of course, in the summer, the days are longer, so you have to fast for longer. The end of Ramadan is marked by great celebration, known as the Eid al-Fitr, the feast of the breaking of the fast, the feast of the breaking of the fast. This is a major Muslim holiday, roughly comparable to Christmas for us. It has that kind of significance. And then we come to the fifth pillar of Islam, the pilgrimage or the Hajj. All Muslim men who can afford it and who are physically able to do so are expected to make the pilgrimage to Mecca at least once in their lifetime. Again, some exceptions are made for reasons of disability or poor health. But this pilgrimage, this Hajj, involves a series of carefully prescribed rituals over the course of a week in the first half of the 12th month of the Islamic calendar. And these rituals include circling the Kaaba a set number of times. The Kaaba is a cube-shaped building in Mecca, which is considered to be Islam's most sacred site. Another ritual that's carried out at this time involves throwing stones at some pillars that represent Satan. The end of the pilgrimage, the end of the Hajj, is marked by another great celebration and a major Muslim holiday known as the Eid al-Adha, the feast of the sacrifice, the feast of the sacrifice. And this feast involves a ritual animal sacrifice commemorating the time that Abraham was required by God to sacrifice his son Ishmael, but God provided a lamb as a substitute. And yes, you heard that correctly. It was Ishmael, not Isaac. After the required pilgrimage, many Muslims will take a trip to Medina, the other sacred city of Islam, to visit Muhammad's mosque and burial place. We can see then that the central tenets and practices of historic Orthodox Islam can be relatively easily identified and summarized. In many respects, it is a simple religion, and Muslims consider that a virtue. However, something can be simple without being true, and something can be simple without being satisfying. And when we come to directly compare Islam and Christianity in later lectures, we will see that the religion founded by Muhammad cannot begin to match the historical credibility and theological profundity of the religion founded on Jesus Christ.
I believe in the spirit.
I believe in trust.
Beauty.
I believe in my mom.
Strawberry ice cream.
Fortune cookies.
Chocolate.
I believe in
The Tooth Fairy.
being honest with yourself.
I believe in Santa Claus.
Aliens, of course. I believe what I want to believe.
I believe in myself.
I believe in myself. I believe in peace.
Let me help you out.
Everyone plays a part. Don't trash
I love taking stuff apart and building new things out of it.
what could be treasure.
Pal's my most advanced android.
This is awesome.
You haven't seen anything yet.
Give your cardboard box another life. Recycle.
Anybody out there? This isn't right. Why don't you just tell me what I did, please? Can somebody just tell me? God, I should talk to somebody. Let me go.
It's me, Artie. Come see what I collected from the Creative Galaxy in my idea box.
Transform your world.
Will you help me make art?
Before you throw it away,
Hey, I have an idea.
think outside the box.
Go be amazing!
Give your cardboard box another life. Recycle.
Morning, Gary. We are GetSchooled.com. You want a college education, don't you?
You know you do.
That's why we're here. We're free and here to guide you through every step of the way, starting with attendance. Gary, financial aid forms. Picking a college, man. You and us. We go together like tacos and Tuesday.
And I love tacos. Go to GetSchooled.com.
To be at peace with myself is the most prominent thing, and I am at peace with myself. I didn't deal this deck, I'm just playing the game. That's all. That's it. Meals on Wheels has given me a mode of freedom that I wouldn't have otherwise. Been making sure they get the nutrition that I need, and it's a balanced meal. My name is Maurice McGriff. America, let's do lunch.
Drop off a hot meal and say hello. Volunteer by donating your lunch break at americaletsdolunch.org.
Only on public access.
We don't care if your graphics aren't flashy, or if your audio doesn't sound perfect, or if you're not the world's greatest camera person. We just want to see what you want us to see, and to know what you would like us to know. Your local public access television station has tools and resources to make this possible, so that we can see what you see. It's the freedom to communicate, and it's only on cable.
They told me a bottle couldn't dream. That I would never become a superhero. But I learned how to fly. Just to come back in a new disguise. And be the hero that I've always wanted to be.
Without a car, a phone, or a computer.
No college degree, though.
Not yet, but life's taught me a lot, and I'm ready for more.
Well, you're not the typical kind of candidate that I hire. But you are exactly what I'm looking for.
Your company could be missing out on the candidates it needs most. Learn how to find a great pool of untapped talent at gradsoflife.org.
But they're wrong. Today I'm just an aluminum can, but one day I could be a stadium.
Me dijeron que no debía soñar. Me llamaron pedazo de basura y juraron que eso es todo lo que llegaría a ser. Dijeron que una botella no podría ver el océano. Ríndete. Regresa al basurero. Pero no les hice caso. Me abrí paso. Y ahora estoy aquí. Soy lo que siempre quise ser.
In December 2013, Time magazine published a feature with the title, Who's Biggest? The 100 Most Significant Figures in History. The methodology that they used to come up with their rankings was interesting, but of course, what everyone was most interested in was the list itself and the figures on the list. According to Time, the most significant figure in history was Jesus, and rightfully so. In second position was Napoleon Bonaparte. In third place was Muhammad. Now, I'm neither a historian nor the son of a historian, but to put Muhammad below Napoleon in terms of historical significance seems strange to me. I don't know how many followers of Napoleon there are in the world today, but I'm pretty sure it doesn't come close to the 1.8 billion followers of Muhammad. In any event, there can be little question about the historical significance of Muhammad given the prominent place held by Islam in the world today. So the question before us is, who was he? Who was Muhammad? In this lecture, I'm going to give a brief summary of and how he came to be established as the prophet of a new monotheistic religion. And I'm going to present this overview under 5 headings corresponding to 5 periods. First, Muhammad's birth and early life. Second, revelations and recitations. Third, the Meccan period. Fourth, the Medinan period. And then fifth, Muhammad's death and successors. Before I begin, however, I do need to issue an important disclaimer. What I'm going to give you is a summary of the traditional Islamic account of Muhammad's life. But you need to know that there is serious scholarly debate about how much of this account is historically reliable and accurate. From a Christian perspective, some of it has to be rejected as unhistorical. But even the main sources for this traditional account date to several hundred years after Muhammad's death. Just compare that with the gospel accounts of Jesus' life, which were written within the lifetimes of his immediate followers. It turns out that the Quran is not a major source of information about the historical Muhammad. All this to say then, what follows is what most Muslims believe about Muhammad's life, but the actual historical facts are very much open to debate. Let's begin then with Muhammad's birth and early life. Muhammad was born in the city of Mecca around the year 570 AD. He was born into the Quraysh tribe, which was the dominant Arab tribe in Mecca at that time. The Quraysh controlled the Kaaba, which was at that time a focal point for pagan idol worship. Muhammad's grandfather had been a leading citizen of Mecca and a guardian of the Kaaba, and Muhammad's father died before he was born, and his mother died when he was a young boy, probably around 6 years old. And so Muhammad was subsequently raised by his uncle, Abu Talib, a camel train merchant who took Muhammad on many trading journeys, during which it appears that Muhammad came into contact with Jews and Christians, but not necessarily Orthodox ones. As a young man, Muhammad gained a reputation for piety, honesty, and wisdom, and he was hired as a manager by a wealthy Meccan businesswoman by the name of Khadijah, whom he eventually married around the year 595. He was aged 25, she was aged 40. Muhammad and Khadijah had a number of children, including 2 sons, although both of these sons died in infancy, meaning that Muhammad had no male heir or successor. Now, according to some accounts, Khadijah and her family were Christians. Whether that's true or not, it does seem that this family influenced Muhammad in a more monotheistic direction. Now we come to the second period, revelations and recitations. By his 30s, Muhammad was regularly spending prolonged periods in solitary meditation. In the year 610, in the month of Ramadan, we're told that the angel Gabriel appeared to Muhammad and commanded him with one Arabic word, ikra, meaning recite. Muhammad protested that he was ummi, which means unlettered or unlearned. Many Muslims understand this as Muhammad saying that he was illiterate, although it may just mean that he was uneducated. In any event, Gabriel repeated this command several times, ikra, recite, until a divine revelation erupted from Muhammad's mouth. And these recitations became the first verses of the Quran. Quran means recitation. Specifically, they become the first 5 verses of chapter 96 of the Quran. Well, afterwards, Muhammad was very concerned that this had in fact been a satanic encounter. He was deeply distressed about this experience and even, we're told, considered suicide. However, he was reassured by Khadijah and her cousin, Waraka, that he had indeed been called by God to be a prophet and a messenger. And Muhammad continued to receive divine revelations over the next 22 years, that is, right up until his death. And these revelations were dramatic experiences and took different forms at different times. Muhammad himself sometimes described them as like the ringing of a bell. According to some sources, they were accompanied by seizures. In any event, Muslims take the Quran to be the final collection of these revelations, although they were originally transmitted orally from memory and not in writing. We come now to the third period, the Meccan period. Around the year 613, so 3 or so years after those first revelations, Muhammad began to preach in Mecca a simple but strident message of religious reform. Forsake idolatry because of Judgment Day. At the heart of his message was a strict monotheism. There is only one God, Allah, and He alone must be worshipped and obeyed. So repent and submit to Allah and to His messenger. It was a message of faith, repentance, and good works. Muhammad was seen both as a warner of judgment, but also a bringer of good news, that there would be reward for the faithful in paradise. The very first convert to Muhammad's cause was a woman, his wife, Khadijah. But there were also a number of significant male converts. Abu Bakr, who would later become the first caliph, successor to Muhammad. Uthman, who would later become the third caliph. Ali, Muhammad's cousin and son-in-law, married to his daughter Fatima, who would later become the fourth caliph. And also Zayd ibn Haritha, Muhammad's own adopted son. Converts to Islam were small in number at this time and faced considerable persecution. Muhammad was seen as a threat to both the rulers and the wealth of Mecca. However, Muhammad and his immediate family were spared the worst persecution due to the ongoing protection of his uncle, Abu Talib. The year 619 is known by Muslims as the year of sorrow, because in that year, Muhammad lost 2 people very dear to him, his uncle, Abu Talib, and his wife, Khadijah. In addition to the sorrow of these bereavements, Abu Talib's death meant that Muhammad and his family became more exposed to persecution. And this persecution would eventually reach the point where Muhammad would have to flee Mecca altogether. Before that happened, however, another very significant event took place. Around the year 621, Muhammad experienced what is known as his miraculous night journey. And there are 2 parts to this night journey that's spoken of in the Islamic traditions. The first part is called the Isra, and it was a journey from Mecca to Jerusalem. Apparently, Muhammad was transported on some kind of winged steed, basically a flying donkey, from Mecca to Jerusalem. But the second part, known as the Miraj, which means ladder, in the second part of the journey, Muhammad was transported from Jerusalem to heaven actually the 7 levels of heaven. And at each of these levels, Muhammad was personally introduced to some of the prophets, including Adam, Jesus, Moses, and Abraham. And it appears that finally Muhammad conversed directly with Allah. Now, Mohammedans have debated whether this was just a vision or an out-of-body experience, or whether it actually happened. The majority view is that it actually happened. But the incident is important to Muslims for 2 reasons. First, it served to confirm Muhammad's prophetic credentials, because he had met with other prophets and with Allah himself. But secondly, it also explains why Muslims are required to pray 5 times a day. Originally, we're told, Allah required 50 prayers a day, but Moses, on the basis of his experiences with the Jews, advised Muhammad to ask for a reduction because the Muslim community couldn't bear the burden of the original requirement, and Allah conceded. And so 5 times of prayer a day it was. Now, in 622, a delegation from the city of Yathrib, which is about 200 miles north of Mecca, came to Mecca to invite Muhammad to be their leader. Groups of Muslims had already begun migrating to Yathrib by this time. Around the same time, there was an attempt by some of the leaders in Mecca to assassinate Muhammad, but they were outwitted by his son-in-law, Ali. Clearly, Muhammad's position in Mecca had become very precarious. And eventually, in September of 622, Muhammad fled Mecca with his followers to take up this offer of leadership in Yathrib. And this climactic event is known as the Hijrah, the migration. And its significance for Muslims is marked by the fact that the Muslim calendar is dated from that year, the year of the Hijrah. It has such significance for Muslims. In fact, it would be as significant for Muslims as the Exodus is for Jewish people. That's how significant the Hijrah is in the Muslim mindset. Well, that leads us to the 4th period, the Medinan period. This city of Yathrib was immediately renamed Madinat al-Nabi, the city of the Prophet, and was thereafter known as Medina. Muhammad instituted a constitution, the Constitution of Medina, which was basically an alliance or treaty between the tribes of Medina, some of which were Jewish, which allowed, or rather acknowledged, Muhammad as the leader and the final judge under God. In effect, this constitution established the first Islamic state, but with important protections and allowances for non-Muslim monotheists, Christians and Jews, known as the people of the book. But Medina had thus become the first Islamic city, and the Meccan Muslims and the Medinan Muslims became united in a single community known as the Ummah, And this Ummah, concept of Ummah, is very important to Muslims even today, the Islamic community. Now, during his time in Medina, Muhammad, we're told, took multiple wives, around 12. The traditions aren't entirely clear on this, but it was around 12 wives. 2 of his wives hold particular significance. One was Aisha. Aisha was the daughter of Abu Bakr, one of Muhammad's companions. And Aisha was betrothed to Muhammad at age 5 or 6. And this marriage was consummated, we're told, at age 9 or 10, when Muhammad was 53. Now, that is very shocking to us, of course, but we should recognize that it would not have been so shocking in the culture of that day. In any event, Aisha is regarded as Muhammad's favorite wife, his most beloved wife. It was, by all accounts, a happy marriage. Another wife, however, went by the name of Zainab. And this marriage was much more controversial at the time. Zainab was a cousin of Muhammad, and apparently Muhammad had been very attracted to Zainab, but the problem was she was already married to his adopted son, Zayd. Zayd eventually divorced Zainab, but even in that culture, it was regarded as unacceptable to marry your former daughter-in-law. Nevertheless, Muhammad received a special revelation from Allah, which is actually included in the Quran now. And this special revelation granted him a special permission to marry Zainab. Now, this, of course, looks rather convenient to non-Muslim observers. And even Aisha raised an eyebrow, we are told. Well, during this Medinan period, there were ongoing conflicts between the Muslims and the pagan Meccans. Muhammad began to lead his followers in raids on Quraysh caravans, mainly out of economic necessity. They just needed stuff, so they had to go and take it. This led to escalating hostilities with the pagan Meccans. And there were three significant battles which established Muhammad's reputation as a military leader and set precedents for later Muslim victories. The first battle was the Battle of Badr in 624. Muhammad led a raid on a large Quraysh caravan, and his 300 men were victorious over a force of nearly 1,000. Muhammad declared that Allah had sent angels to help the Muslims, and the victory became legendary and a model for Muslim military victories. The second battle was the Battle of Uhud in 625. In this case, it was a defeat. Muhammad's men were shamefully defeated, but afterwards, Muhammad received a revelation explaining that defeat. The Muslims had lost because they'd been more concerned with gaining spoils than fighting in the cause of Allah. They had wrong motives, and so they were defeated. The third battle is known as the Battle of the Trench in 627. Here, the Meccans joined together with some other Arab tribes, and they laid siege to the city of Medina. Muhammad and his followers were able to resist the siege until the Meccans eventually gave up and went home. But this battle is also notorious because the Muslims were betrayed by one of the Jewish tribes within Medina. And afterwards, Muhammad ordered every adult male in that tribe to be beheaded. And that's what happened. Now, around the year 628, Muhammad traveled to Mecca and he arranged a truce, a 10-year truce with the Quraysh in Mecca. This apparently was prompted by a vision in which Muhammad had performed the pilgrimage to the Kaaba in Mecca. This pilgrimage, it turns out, was already a pagan practice, but Muhammad wanted to Islamicize it. And the treaty allowed him and his followers to make an annual pilgrimage to Mecca, known as the Hajj. This treaty did not last, however. For reasons that are obscure, Muhammad decided that the Meccans had violated the treaty. And so in the year 630, he marched his army of now 10,000 men to Mecca. Well, the Meccans didn't put up much of a fight. They quickly surrendered, embraced Islam, and installed a Muslim government in Mecca, just as in Medina. And Mecca thus became the second Islamic city after Medina. One of Muhammad's first actions once he got into Mecca was to purify the Kaaba by destroying all of the pagan idols. But the conquest of Mecca was the crowning victory of Muhammad's career. In the 2 years that followed, Muhammad and his followers defeated or subjugated all of the other major tribes in the area, and Arabia fell under Muslim rule. Muhammad's policy toward the Arab tribes was basically this: submit to Islam or face the consequences. Submit to Islam or face the consequences. If they were pagans, then they had to convert. They had to convert to Islam. There was no other option. If they were Jews or Christians, if they were people of the book, then they didn't have to convert to Islam, but they had to at least submit to Muslim rule and pay the jizya, a kind of poll tax, a payment for protection for living under Muslim rule. Well, now we come to the final period in Muhammad's life. In the year 632, Muhammad managed to make one final pilgrimage before falling ill and dying on June 8th of that year. Many Muslims believe, in fact, that he was poisoned. In any event, that brought an end to the life of one of the most influential religious and military leaders in history. Muhammad was buried in the house that he shared with Aisha in Medina, and that his tomb is now incorporated into the mosque at Medina, the Masjid al-Nabawi. Muhammad's somewhat unexpected death created an immediate crisis in the Muslim community because he hadn't left any explicit instructions about how Muslims should be led and governed following his death. The short version of the story is that the tribal chiefs came together and elected a series of caliphs to rule over the entire Muslim world, known as the caliphate. It's like our word king and kingdom. A caliph is one who rules over the caliphate. The first four successors to Muhammad were known as the Rashidun caliphs, the righteous or rightly guided caliphs. And they were Abu Bakr, one of the first converts and the father of Aisha. Then Umar, who had been Abu Bakr's right-hand man. Thirdly, the third caliph was Uthman, another early convert. And the fourth caliph was Ali, the cousin and son-in-law of Muhammad. Ali's right to the caliphate was in fact challenged by several different groups, which led to a series of Muslim civil wars, and ultimately led to different Islamic sects that continued throughout subsequent centuries, each sect claiming to be the true successors of Muhammad and the true representatives of Islam. And the main division would, of course, be the Sunni-Shia split, which we'll come back to later on. But by the time of Ali's death, Muslim rule had been decisively established in the Arabian Peninsula. It extended to modern-day Libya in the west and beyond modern-day Iran to the east, having completely overrun the Persian Empire. And it would continue to expand across North Africa and Central Asia in successive centuries, pushing up against the boundaries of Christian Europe and eventually leading to the historic conflicts that we know as the Crusades. Now, why does all this matter? Why does this history lesson matter? Well, here are two reasons why it matters, and here I close. First, the way the world is today depends in large measure on Muhammad, and that is why it's important. But secondly, Muhammad, we need to understand, is viewed by Muslims as the model Muslim, as a perfect example. This is the Islamic concept known as Sunnah, Muhammad as the model Muslim. Christians look to the patriarchs, the prophets, the apostles as examples, but not as perfect ones. They're flawed. For us, only Christ is the perfect example and the perfect human being. For Muslims, Muhammad plays that role.